Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, I'm Matt with Doogs Models, and this is the Flankoff. Okay, it's been a few days since I shot any footage, and honestly, I'm not sure where I'm going to end up with material once I get into editing. So let's take a look at what we've done on the Great Wall Su-35 exhaust area and do a quick recap. So basically, I started playing around first on the Kitty Hawk kit, which is the stalking horse nowadays, and was not exactly happy with what I was getting. Part of it was the metallics seemed a bit too cool. If you look at a lot of the photos of these things, the metals going on back here are typically much warmer, almost like a coppery, bronzy kind of color, or at least leaning in that direction versus straight up, steel and aluminum and whatnot. So that led me down some paths of maybe trying to experiment with non-metallics and things like that, which kind of worked, kind of didn't, but ultimately led me to this path. Now, what all do we have going on here? So first of all, we have, as you can see kind of up here, a base coat of Gun's GX2 gloss black, which is a very fantastic gloss black. And if you need to use a gloss black for any reason, and you need it to be as shiny and smooth as possible, GX2 is your ticket. Now that was laid down, and then we started in on the metallics. And what you see here is basically a gigantic mix of different shades. So on the back, with the exhaust pedals here, we started out with Mr. Paint Steel, which is a nice dark shade. Has not as dark as all-clad steel, but still on the darker end of things. Then moving up here, we move into some titanium and some pale burnt metal. We've got more steel around this ring right here. And then we went into, I believe it was more, let's see, what was it? I believe it was dark aluminum back here and then titanium up here. So then on top of a lot of this went some Mr. Paint burnt iron, which one thing I discovered in my various experiments is that that shade, if you spray it lightly over other colors, gives this really wonderful warm patina to them. So that's definitely what's going on here on the main engine humps. It's also going on back here on the exhaust pedals. And at the moment, I currently have a few other shades of Mr. Paint metallics on their way to me. They have not yet arrived, so I'm a bit hamstrung in what I can do in terms of toning some of these different pedals and panels and things. However, that has not stopped me from kind of proceeding on course. In here, where we have these sort of, I guess you could call them the inner pedals, the ones that are exposed when the cans are opened up like they are, I went ahead and painted those a non-metallic, and in particular, MRP's Dark Gunship Gray, which I don't really think is a great Dark Gunship Gray. It feels too warm and too light to me compared to the, if we actually go with the FS number, the 36081, that's Euro 1 Dark Gray. That's what you see on the green, and gray Phantoms from the 80s and early 90s and things like that. So that seemed a pretty good shade for in this area in here, and I've sprayed that and then masked it off with the Galaxy Models mask set, which is a fucking lifesaver. And I've also masked off a bunch of squares around this particular ring of pedals. If you look at reference photos, a lot of times those are left in a nice shiny silvery looking metal as opposed to the more coppery, bronzy, burnt irony type of shades that you see elsewhere. So once the paints I'm waiting for come in, we'll mask off on either side and we'll go ahead and knock those out. On the underside, as you can see, we still need to make our presence known. And this is another one where I am waiting on things to arrive in order to have my fun, because it does seem like these tend to be, at least again from the reference photos, maybe it's lighting, maybe it's something else, they do seem to be much more on that warm side of things. Now, going back around at the top, if you look in these areas up here and you look at reference photos, these little panels are typically kind of they're doing their own thing. So I'm going to mask those off, and then I'll come back later once everything else is done and weather them up accordingly. But they are definitely their own entities separate from the rest of the panels. I've got one great reference shot showing the 35 kind of from a takeoff angle, so it's, you know, it's almost like kind of like this. And what it shows is on these two panels, on this panel you have essentially a bunch of heat staining marks. I'm going to guess where things are riveted down, kind of running longitudinal. So they come back like this. They're sort of like in double stripes. So, you know, 1, 2, and then you go over a little bit, 1, 2, and so on. And this panel up here, the stripes run laterally. So they go across like this. And they're thin, but they certainly stand out. And I think they're the kind of thing that would add a lot of visual interest to what's going on here. And so the idea has been add those and then come in on top with things like, you know, blues and violets and sepias to really play up the weathering and the heat staining. And we've already got a little bit of that going on in these rings here with the all-clad hot metal colors, which it's amazing. These things are literally just liquid. I mean, they're very, you know, they should be very thin and spray very nicely, but they're a bitch to spray through the airbrush for some reason. I still can't figure it out. They seem to almost like grab into the airbrush, and so even with my HPC Plus, you know, it's like I have to literally get halfway on the trigger, if not more, to get them to flow properly, which is not useful for trying to do little tiny detail work in here. So I've been kind of racking my brain trying to think, how can I handle these sort of longitudinal and lateral stripes that are very much that sort of heat stained blue and violet type tones when I have basically no fine line control with the paints that I have right now. And so I thought, well, I could mask them, you know, come in with a whole bunch of Azu tape and Tamiya tape and pull it off that way. But then you run into the issue of you have just a bunch of straight lines and it looks very contrived. And so that led me to a different course of action. Move this out of the way. So if I can't really get in there and freehand these lines with an airbrush, because this paint doesn't play nice, and MRP's burnt metallic blue is a very dark and much more opaque thing than I want. And because it's, you know, as you can see down here, it's literally a metallic, it has metallic pigments in it, there's a limit again to how fine you can get in there and spray with that. So if I can't use these, and both being lacquers, they're not really paintable, what do I use? Well, I started experimenting with these Pigma brush pens from Sakura, and basically what these are is what they say they are. They are pens that have a kind of brush-like tip. And get a paint mule over here just to see how this works. You take them and find some metallic area like this. You can literally, wow, maybe not on the, maybe not on that. All right, we'll do it on the white. How about that? So you take these and you can literally draw these very fine lines, which look decent, right? But then you can take them and you can rub your finger on them and you can get a little bit of sort of vagueness out of it. So my plan, and I've already tested this a little bit on the test mule that is now the Great Wall kit. You can see in here we've got a couple of lines that we've drawn. I tried putting some blue over brown. I think that's a bit too stark. But then I've got some blue and some violet and things like that. And basically, it's a matter of coming in here and just bringing the pen across like so. That's all there is to it. Now, the challenging thing is, how do I space these so they're appropriate? And drawing freehand is not in any way, shape, or form my strong suit, so how do we maintain a good line across here? Well, for that, I am going to use tape as a guide. So essentially come in here and mask off the areas I need, maybe use some 1mm Azu tape to give me space to work in, and then from there come in and draw the lines. And I still need to figure out if I want to keep them as stark as, you know, these ones that we just drew here, or if I want to do the thing where I streak them in like that and they become much more subtle, but that may mean that they could potentially disappear later on. So I think I might throw some clears over this just to see how these different approaches look. And then from there, we can go ahead and start playing with the Great Wall Kit again. Okay, so I've gone ahead and masked off all of the various little ports and things that the Galaxy model's mask set covers. And as you can see here, we've got the initial heat staining lines on this aft section of the engine hump, brought to you by these Sakura Pigma brush pens. We've got purple and blue. Now what I've done, as you can see over here on the starboard side, we've got some tiny little Azu tape lines here. We've got the 1mm sort of forming these borders, and the 0.4mm, I think it is, kind of forming the boundaries that will be used for outlining the ink lines. Super exciting stuff. Now, all we do to deal with these is basically come in here, and this is the fun part because there's not really a good way to get in here at these without making a huge old mess. So basically just try to get on either side of those little lines. The bigger millimeter tape lines are more there for if anything fucks up. Literally, we just come in here like that. And I'm going to come in and vary a few of these up purple, but for now, let's get most of them in blue. The good thing about these brush pens is they do lay down a nice amount of ink, but they do it in a fairly controlled fashion. And something I discovered on the port side is that you can come back like 24 hours later, and with a Q-tip you can kind of smear them a little bit. You know, if you see over here, they started out very prominent, and I've come in and smeared them just a tiny little bit, and it tones them down somewhat. And then we're going to come in here and darken all this up with additional things, so they won't be quite as prominent as they are now, but they will still be visible, I hope, underneath what's coming next. And by having the tape lines arranged this way, we get a little bit of a raggedness in them, so they don't look just like they're just airbrushed on. Because if you look at the heat stainings on the actual reference photos, they are a bit gunkier than just straight lines. Now let's switch up and do a few of these in purple for shits and giggles. See, that's definitely starting to come together a little bit. It's going to be fun when we get these done. We're going to clear coat them. I think that some tape might, if these smear with Q-tips, I think some tape might bring them up. So clear coat them or put something else on top. Then move over to the lateral ones up here. Yeah, it's getting these ones around the side that are real dicey because there's just no way to get in there at the right angle to really pull it off. So you go in here like that, and boom, you hit the tail. I'm pause and wrap these up, and then we'll take the tape off. Okay, so here we have it. Some nice stain lines on the aft portion of the engine humps to match these. Now we'll let these sit overnight and come back tomorrow and do a little quick sort of brushing in there with a Q-tip. Nothing fancy, you know, just like that. Just to dull them down a little bit like these. And then we can keep on moving. Hopefully my order of various MRP metallics will come in so I can move on and really start darkening things up. Something else I'm keen to perhaps try, and I'll probably give it a shot on the Kitty Hawk Mule, is this Guns 183, which is a super clear gray tone. I'm not quite sure how this plays or how it's different from, say, Tamiya Smoke, because if you look at it, it's definitely gray. But in terms of an overall sort of maybe darkening element, I don't know. Could be interesting to play with. So that is going to get a shot, but I need to prove it before I play with it on this. And then I want to make all of this stuff in here generally a bit warmer and a bit darker before I go into the heat staining. So that is that. Okay, so following up the aft engine hump area where we have those heat staining lines that run longitudinally, you know, front to back, up here in this forward section we've got lateral lines. So I've taped these off with essentially 2mm tape with some 0.4mm tape in there for spacing. And I'm just coming in here and hitting these with a bit of ink. Now, anybody who can freehand this without tape, I give serious kudos to, because I just cannot. Okay, so we've got these all inked up, and let's go ahead and take off the tape. Okay, so there we have it. We got the lateral lines and the longitudinal lines. And tomorrow night, once those are a little bit set up, I can come in and kind of knock them down just a bit with a Q-tip. And hopefully the darker metallics and the more warm metallics that I've been waiting for will arrive, and we will be able to press forward.